The Galactic Integration Academy was the largest school in the known universe. It floated in space like a small moon, with towers made of glass and metal that caught the light of 3 distant suns. Every year, thousands of young beings came here from hundreds of different planets. They came to learn how to work together, how to keep peace, and how to build a future where all species could live side by side. Danny Carter was one of 12 humans who had been accepted that year. He was 23 years old, with short brown hair and calm gray eyes. He had grown up in a small town in Ohio, where the biggest excitement was the county fair every summer. Now he was millions of miles from Earth, surrounded by aliens who looked like something out of his childhood nightmares. Humans had only made contact with alien life 15 years ago. In the grand scale of the galaxy, that was nothing. Most species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. They had built empires, fought wars, and made peace long before humans had invented the wheel. To them, humans were newcomers, babies, primitive creatures who had barely crawled out of their caves. Danny had heard the whispers since the day he arrived. The other students looked at him with curiosity, but also with something else. Something that looked a lot like pity. His roommate was a Valanthi named Crix. The Valanthi were reptilian beings with 4 arms and scales that shifted color based on their mood. Crix was friendly enough, always willing to help Danny understand the strange customs of the academy. But even Crix could not hide his confusion about humans. "I do not understand," Crix said one evening, his scales turning a puzzled shade of blue. "You have no claws, no fangs. Your skin is soft and tears easily. How did your species survive on your planet?" Danny smiled. He had answered this question many times already. "We found other ways," he said simply. Crix tilted his head, clearly unsatisfied with the answer, but he did not push further. The academy had many classes, but the one that worried Danny the most was called Predator Combat History. It was taught by a species that every student feared. The Dracorians were known across the galaxy as the most dangerous hunters in existence. They had conquered dozens of worlds before joining the Interstellar Coalition. Even now, centuries after they had agreed to peace, other species still trembled at the sight of them. On the first day of class, Danny walked into the lecture hall and immediately understood why. The room was large, with seats arranged in a half-circle facing a raised platform. Students from a dozen different species were already seated, their conversations dying as Danny entered. He found a seat in the back row and waited. Then the instructor arrived. Instructor Varketh was a nightmare made flesh. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his body covered in scales, as black as the void between stars. 4 eyes burned like molten gold in his skull, each one moving independently to scan the room. 2 curved horns swept back from his head, and his hands ended in claws that looked sharp enough to cut through metal. When he walked, his claws clicked against the floor like knives being sharpened. The room fell completely silent. Varketh moved to the front of the platform and stood there for a long moment, letting his gaze travel across every student. When his eyes reached Danny, they lingered for just a second longer than necessary. Then Varketh reached into a bag at his side and pulled out something that made several students gasp. It was a skull. The skull was about the size of a human head, with elongated features and empty eye sockets that seemed to stare at nothing. Danny recognized it immediately. It was a Valanthi skull, the same species as his roommate Crix. Varketh placed the skull on his desk with a heavy thud. The sound echoed through the silent room. "This," Varketh said, his voice deep and rough like stones grinding together, "belonged to my first kill. I was 14 cycles old when I took it. That is young, even for my people." He ran one claw along the top of the skull almost gently. "I keep this skull to remind my students of a simple truth. In this galaxy, there are only 2 kinds of beings, 'predators' and 'prey'. There is no middle ground. There is no third option. If you choose to be a predator, you will die. You are either the hunter or the hunted. His 4 eyes swept across the room again. Some of you come from predator species. You have claws, fangs, venom, or strength. You have earned your place in this galaxy through blood and struggle. You understand what it means to hunt, to kill, to survive. Varketh's gaze shifted to the corner where the prey species sat huddled together. A group of small, furry beings from a peaceful planet. A tall, thin creature with delicate wings, and Crix, whose scales had turned a pale, fearful white. Others of you come from prey species. You have survived not through strength, but through numbers, through hiding, through running. You exist because predators like me allow you to exist. Then Varketh looked directly at Danny. And then there are the humans. Every head in the room turned to look at Danny. He felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes upon him, but he kept his face calm and his breathing steady. Varketh walked slowly up the aisle toward Danny's seat. His claws clicked with each step. When he reached Danny's row, he stopped and leaned down until his face was only inches away. "Humans are a mystery to me," Varketh said, his breath hot and smelling of something metallic. "You have no claws, no fangs, no armor, no venom. By every measure, you should be prey. And yet you do not act like prey. You do not run. You do not hide. You spread across your planet like a disease, killing everything in your path." He straightened up and addressed the whole class. "Humans are what we call endurance hunters. They do not chase their prey with speed. They follow it slowly, for hours, for days, until the prey collapses from exhaustion. Then they move in for the kill." Varketh made a sound that might have been a laugh. "A coward's strategy, a scavenger's tactic. True predators do not need to wait. True predators strike with overwhelming force and end the fight in seconds." He walked back to the front of the room and tapped the Valanthe skull. "I killed this one in less than 3 seconds. That is what real predators do." Danny said nothing. He pulled out his datapad and began taking notes, his face showing no emotion at all. But inside his mind, something was stirring. A plan was beginning to form. Because Danny knew something that Varketh did not. Something that most aliens did not understand about humans. Humans remembered. They remembered every insult, every slight, every moment of disrespect. And when the time was right, they responded. Not with rage or violence, but with something far more dangerous. Patience. Danny would wait. He would learn. And when the moment came, he would teach Instructor Varketh a lesson about Earth that the Dracorian would never forget. The class continued, and Danny kept taking notes. But in the back of his mind, he was already planning his next move. The weeks that followed were not easy for Danny Carter. Instructor Varketh had clearly decided that the human student needed to learn his place in the galaxy. Every class became a test of Danny's patience and endurance. Varketh called on Danny constantly. While other students might be asked 1 or 2 questions per class, Danny was asked a dozen. The questions were always difficult, designed to make him look foolish in front of his classmates. When Danny answered correctly, Varketh would find some small error to criticize. When Danny made a mistake, Varketh would announce it to the entire room with obvious pleasure. "The human thinks he knows about combat," Varketh would say, his 4 eyes gleaming with amusement. "But what can a species without claws truly understand about fighting?" The physical training was even worse. Varketh assigned Danny the most grueling exercises. While other students practiced basic combat moves, Danny was forced to run laps around the training field. He ran until his legs burned and his lungs screamed for air. He ran until sweat soaked through his uniform and dripped onto the ground. But he never stopped. He never complained. He simply kept running. This seemed to frustrate Varketh more than anything else. The instructor had expected Danny to break, to cry, to beg for mercy. Instead, Danny just kept going. His body might be exhausted, but his eyes remained calm and steady. There was something in those gray eyes that Varketh could not understand, something that refused to submit. "You will run until I tell you to stop," Varketh commanded one day. Danny ran for 3 hours straight. When Varketh finally told him to stop, Danny walked off the field without a word. He did not limp, he did not stumble. He simply walked away with his head held high. That night, Danny's friend Lucy Bennett found him in the cafeteria. Lucy was another human student at the academy, enrolled in the medical training program. She was 25 years old, with red hair and freckles across her nose. She had grown up on a cattle ranch in Montana, where she had learned to be tough before she learned to read. Lucy sat down across from Danny and pushed a tray of food toward him. "You need to eat," she said. "I saw what Varketh made you do today. Your body needs fuel to recover." Danny nodded and began eating. The food was strange, some kind of protein paste that aliens considered nutritious. It tasted like cardboard, but Danny had learned not to complain about alien food. "He is trying to break you," Lucy said quietly, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "Everyone can see it. The way he targets you in class, the way he makes you work harder than everyone else. He wants you to give up and leave the academy." "I know," Danny replied between bites. "So what are you going to do about it?" Danny looked up from his food. For a moment, Lucy saw something change in his expression. His gray eyes grew darker, colder. There was something ancient in that look, something that reminded her of the stories her grandmother used to tell about the old days. Stories about hunters who tracked wolves through frozen mountains. Stories about men who faced grizzly bears with nothing but a knife. "I am going to teach him a lesson," Danny said. Lucy leaned forward. "What kind of lesson?" "Varketh thinks that skull on his desk makes him powerful. He thinks it proves he is a predator and everyone else is prey. He uses it to frighten students, to make them feel small and weak." Danny set down his fork and looked directly at Lucy. "I am going to show him what humans used to hunt, before we became soft, before we built cities and invented laws. I am going to remind him what we really are." Lucy studied her friend for a long moment. She had known Danny for 2 years, ever since they had trained together on Earth before coming to the academy. She had always thought of him as quiet and gentle, the kind of person who preferred books to fights. But now she saw something else beneath that calm surface, something patient and dangerous. "Be careful," she said finally. "Varketh is not someone you want as an enemy." Danny smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I am not trying to make an enemy. I am trying to earn respect. And sometimes, the only way to earn respect is to show your teeth." The next day, Danny approached Varketh after class. The other students were still filing out of the room, glancing nervously at the human who dared to speak to the fearsome instructor. "Instructor Varketh," Danny said, his voice calm and steady. "May I speak with you?" Varketh turned his massive head to look down at Danny. His 4 eyes blinked slowly like a predator studying something mildly interesting. "What do you want, human?" "I have been studying your culture," Danny said. "I have learned that among Dracorians, displaying trophies is a sign of status. The skulls of fallen enemies prove your worth as a hunter. They establish your place in the hierarchy." Varketh's eyes narrowed slightly. "You have done your research. That is more than most humans bother to do." "I would like to participate in this tradition," Danny continued. "With your permission, I would like to bring a trophy to our next class, a skull from my home world." The room went quiet. The few students who remained stopped moving and stared at Danny in disbelief. A human challenging a Dracorian to a display of hunting prowess? It was unheard of. Varketh was silent for a moment. Then he laughed. The sound was horrible, like rocks being crushed together, and it echoed off the walls of the lecture hall. "You? A human?" Varketh stepped closer, towering over Danny like a mountain of black scales and sharp edges. What trophy could your soft, clawless species possibly offer? Did you kill a small animal? A fish, perhaps? Maybe you stepped on an insect and kept its shell as a prize? Danny did not step back. He did not look away. He simply stood there, meeting Varketh's 4 burning eyes with his own calm gray gaze. Something older, Danny said quietly. Something from before humans were soft. Something from a time when my planet was ruled by creatures that would make even Dracorians hesitate. The laughter died in Varketh's throat. He studied Danny with new interest, trying to read the human's expression, but Danny's face gave nothing away. "Very well, human," Varketh said finally. "Bring your trophy. We shall see what Earth considers a predator. But I warn you, if your offering is pathetic, if you waste my time with something small and weak, I will make your remaining time at this academy very unpleasant." Danny nodded once. "I understand. Instructor, I will not disappoint you." He turned and walked out of the lecture hall, leaving Varketh standing alone with his Valanthe skull. The Dracorian watched Danny go, and for the first time since meeting the human, he felt something strange stirring in his chest. It was not quite fear, but it was not quite confidence either. It was curiosity. What could a human possibly bring that would impress a Dracorian? What skull could a species without claws or fangs offer as a trophy? Varketh looked down at the skull on his desk. It had frightened students for decades. It was his proof of power, his symbol of dominance. Surely nothing a human could bring would compare. Surely. That night, Danny returned to his room and sat down at his communication terminal. The screen glowed softly in the darkness as he typed in a familiar address. It took a few minutes for the signal to travel across the vast distance between Nexus Station and Earth, but eventually the screen flickered and a face appeared. Frank Carter was 62 years old, with a bald head and a thick gray beard. His face was weathered from years of working outdoors, and his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was Danny's uncle on his mother's side, and he had been like a father to Danny ever since Danny's parents had died in a car accident when Danny was 12. Frank was also one of the most respected paleontologists in the world. He worked at the Natural History Museum in Chicago, where he spent his days studying bones that were millions of years old. "Danny," Frank said, his smile spreading wide across his face, "it has been too long. How is life among the stars?" "Complicated," Danny admitted. "Uncle Frank, I need your help with something." Frank's smile faded slightly. He knew his nephew well enough to recognize when something serious was happening. "Tell me." Danny explained everything. The academy, Instructor Varketh, the skull on the desk, and the challenge he had issued. Frank listened without interrupting, his expression growing more thoughtful as the story unfolded. When Danny finished, Frank was quiet for a long moment. "You want me to send you a skull," Frank said finally. "Something impressive. Something that will make this alien understand what Earth used to be like." "Yes. But it needs to be big, Uncle Frank. Really big. The Dracorian skull is meant to intimidate. I need something that will make it look small." Frank stroked his beard, thinking. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his weathered face. "I think I have exactly what you need. Do you remember the cast we made of Sue?" Danny's eyes widened. "The T-Rex?" "The very same. It is a perfect replica of the skull, accurate down to the smallest detail. The museum has several copies for educational purposes. I think I can convince the director to loan one out for a very special demonstration." "Can you really do that?" Frank laughed. "Danny, when I tell them that my nephew is going to use it to teach a bunch of aliens about Earth's history, they will probably pay for the shipping themselves. This is exactly the kind of thing scientists dream about." 2 weeks later, a cargo transport arrived at Nexus Station. The ship carried supplies from dozens of different planets, mundane things like food and equipment. But in the cargo hold, marked with special handling instructions, sat a large crate addressed to Danny Carter. Danny had arranged for the crate to be delivered directly to the lecture hall on the morning of his presentation. He wanted the reveal to be perfect. He wanted Varketh and all the students to see the skull for the first time together. The morning arrived cold and gray, with artificial clouds drifting across the ceiling of the station's main dome. Danny woke early and dressed carefully in his academy uniform. He ate a small breakfast, more out of habit than hunger, and then made his way to the lecture hall. The crate was already there, sitting at the front of the room. It was large, nearly as tall as Danny himself and twice as wide. Strange symbols were printed on the sides, words in human languages that the aliens could not read. Warning labels indicated that the contents were fragile and valuable. Students began to file into the room, whispering to each other as they saw the massive crate. What had the human brought? What could possibly be inside something so large? Lucy slipped into a seat near the front and caught Danny's eye. She gave him a small nod of encouragement. Danny nodded back. Then Varketh arrived. The Dracorian instructor strode into the room with his usual confidence, his claws clicking against the floor. He paused when he saw the crate, his 4 eyes blinking in surprise at its size. Then he looked at Danny and made a sound that might have been amusement. "So the human has brought his trophy," Varketh said, moving to stand behind his desk. The Valanthe skull sat in its usual place, a grim reminder of the instructor's deadly nature. "I must admit, the container is impressive. Let us see if the contents match." He gestured toward Danny. "Proceed, human. Show us what passes for a predator on your world." Danny walked to the front of the room. He could feel every eye in the lecture hall fixed upon him. Dozens of aliens from dozens of different species, all watching to see what the soft, clawless human had brought. Danny placed his hands on the latches of the crate. "Before I open this," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room, "I want to explain something about my planet. Earth is an old world. It has existed for over 4 billion years. During that time, many different creatures have lived and died there. Some were small and weak, but others were not." He unlatched the first seal. 66 million years ago, Earth was ruled by creatures called dinosaurs. They dominated my planet for over 160 million years. That is longer than most civilizations in this galaxy have existed. He unlatched the second seal. Among the dinosaurs, there was one species that stood above all others. It was the apex predator of its time, the most fearsome hunter my planet has ever produced. Its name meant King of the Tyrant Lizards. Danny pulled away the protective covering and reached into the crate. "We call it Tyrannosaurus Rex." He lifted the skull out of the crate with both hands, straining under its weight, and set it on the desk beside Varketh's Valanthe skull. The room went completely silent. The skull was enormous. It was over 5 feet long, longer than many of the students were tall. The jaws were lined with teeth the size of bananas, each one curved and serrated like a knife designed for cutting through flesh. The eye sockets were massive, suggesting a creature with perfect vision for hunting prey. The bone structure was thick and heavy, built to support a bite force that could crush anything. Beside it, the Valanthe skull looked tiny, like a toy, like something a child might play with. Varketh stood frozen behind his desk, his 4 eyes wide with shock. His claws had stopped clicking. His entire body had gone still in a way that Danny had never seen before. The other students stared in silent awe. The prey species looked at the skull with pure terror, imagining what it would be like to be hunted by such a creature. The predator species looked at it with something like respect, recognizing a fellow killer even across millions of years and millions of miles. Danny stepped back from the desk and let the comparison speak for itself. The Dracorian skull that had frightened generations of students now looked small and insignificant. Varketh's trophy, his proof of power and dominance, had been completely overshadowed by the fossilized remains of a creature that had died 66 million years ago. The message was clear. Humans came from a world where monsters like this had once ruled. They came from a world that had produced predators beyond anything the galaxy had ever imagined. And they had survived. Danny looked at Varketh and waited for the instructor to speak. But Varketh said nothing. He simply stared at the massive skull, his 4 golden eyes reflecting the empty sockets of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. For the first time since Danny had met him, the fearsome Dracorian looked uncertain. The silence in the lecture hall stretched on for what felt like hours. No one moved. No one spoke. Every eye in the room was fixed on the massive skull that now dominated Instructor Varketh's desk. Danny let them look. He let them absorb what they were seeing. He let the image of the Tyrannosaurus Rex skull sink into their minds, replacing their old assumptions about Earth and the humans who came from it. Then he began to speak. "This skull belonged to a Tyrannosaurus Rex," Danny said, his voice calm and clear in the silent room. "It lived on Earth approximately 66 million years ago. It was the apex predator of its time, the most dangerous creature walking on land. Nothing hunted it. Nothing challenged it. For millions of years, it ruled my planet without any rivals." He walked slowly around the desk, letting the students see the skull from different angles. The T-Rex stood over 12 feet tall at the hip. From nose to tail, it measured nearly 40 feet long. It weighed between 9 and 14 tons, depending on the individual. Its legs were built for speed and power. It could run faster than most prey could flee. Danny paused beside the massive jaws. But the most impressive thing about this creature was its bite. The T-Rex had the strongest bite force of any land animal in Earth's history. Over 12,000 pounds of pressure. It did not just kill its prey, it crushed them. It could bite through bone like we bite through bread. Its teeth were not designed to cut, they were designed to destroy. He turned to face the class. This was the king of my planet. The ultimate predator. Nothing that lived alongside it could challenge its supremacy. Danny walked back to the front of the desk and stood between the two skulls. The T-Rex loomed behind him like a nightmare from the ancient past. The Valanthe skull looked pitiful in comparison. And it went extinct. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The T-Rex is gone. Every single one of them died millions of years before humans even existed. And they were not alone. Earth has produced hundreds of apex predators over its long history, creatures that would terrify even the most dangerous species in this galaxy. Danny began to list them, counting on his fingers. The Megalodon, a shark so large that it could swallow a shuttle in one bite. Its jaws were wide enough to fit 3 adult humans standing side by side. It ruled the oceans for 20 million years. He held up another finger. The saber-toothed cat, a massive feline with fangs as long as a human forearm. It was built to take down prey 10 times its size. It hunted mammoths and giant ground sloths across the frozen plains. Another finger. The short-faced bear, a predator that stood 13 feet tall on its hind legs. It was the largest carnivorous mammal to ever walk on land. It could run down horses and tear them apart with its claws. Danny lowered his hand. All of these creatures are gone now. Every giant predator that ever ruled Earth is dead. Their bones sit in museums. Their images are printed in children's books. They are nothing but memories now. He looked directly at Varketh. "Do you want to know what killed them, instructor?" Varketh said nothing. His 4 eyes remained fixed on Danny, burning with an intensity that might have been anger or curiosity or something else entirely. "Time," Danny said, "and us." He took a step forward. "Humans are not apex predators because of our claws. We do not have any. Humans are not apex predators because of our teeth. They are flat and dull, designed for eating plants as much as meat. Humans are not apex predators because of our strength. A chimpanzee is 3 times stronger than a human of the same size. Danny spread his hands. But we have something else. We have endurance. We can walk for days without stopping. We can survive in deserts, in jungles, in frozen wastelands, in places where no other creature would even try to live. We adapt. We learn. We remember. His voice grew harder. And we are patient. Danny turned to address the entire class, not just Varketh. You asked what kind of hunters humans are. You called us cowards for chasing our prey until it collapsed. You said that true predators strike with overwhelming force. But let me tell you something about overwhelming force. He pointed at the T-Rex skull. This creature had overwhelming force. It had the strongest bite in history. It had claws that could tear through armor. It had everything that you think a predator should have. And where is it now? Dead. Extinct. Nothing but bones in a glass case. Danny turned back to Varketh. Every giant predator that ever lived on Earth made the same mistake. They thought that strength and speed and claws were enough. They thought that being the biggest and the most dangerous made them invincible. They were wrong. He took another step toward Varketh's desk. Humans did not beat them by being stronger. We beat them by being smarter. We beat them by working together. We beat them by learning their weaknesses and exploiting them. We beat them by never giving up, no matter how many of us died, no matter how long it took. Danny's gray eyes locked onto Varketh's golden ones. We outlasted them all. The T-Rex ruled for millions of years, and now its skull sits on a desk in a classroom, used as a teaching tool for children. The megalodon terrorized the oceans, and now humans swim in those same waters without fear. Every monster that Earth ever produced is gone, and we are still here. The room was absolutely silent. Even the air seemed to have stopped moving. So, yes, instructor, Danny said quietly. Humans are endurance hunters. We are patient, we are adaptable, and we have a very, very long memory. We remember every creature that ever threatened us. We remember every predator that ever hunted our ancestors, and we remember what happened to them. He reached out and placed one hand on the T-Rex skull. This is what humans consider a predator. This is what we grew up with. This is what shaped our species, what taught us to be clever and persistent and ruthless when we need to be. Danny lifted the skull and began placing it back in the crate. You asked which category humans fall into, whether we are predators or prey. I hope this answers your question. He sealed the crate and turned to face Varketh one final time. We are neither. We are something else. Something the galaxy has never seen before. We are the species that turned its greatest predators into museum displays and children's toys. We are the species that refuses to die, no matter what the universe throws at us. Danny walked back to his seat and sat down. He pulled out his data pad and waited for the class to continue, as if nothing unusual had happened. But something had changed. Everyone in the room could feel it. The air itself felt different, charged with a new understanding. The other students looked at Danny with new eyes. The prey species looked at him with something like hope. The predator species looked at him with something like respect. And Varketh stood behind his desk in silence, his claws still, his 4 eyes thoughtful, staring at the place where the T-Rex skull had been. For the first time in his long career as an instructor, he had nothing to say. After that day, everything changed at the Galactic Integration Academy. The story of the human and the skull spread through the station like fire through dry grass. Students who had not been in the lecture hall heard about it from those who had. Within hours, everyone knew what Danny Carter had done. Within days, the story had spread to other parts of the station. Within weeks, it had reached other worlds entirely. A human had challenged a Dracorian to a display of hunting prowess, and the human had won. Instructor Varketh never mocked Danny again. In fact, his entire attitude toward the human students changed. He began calling on Danny not to humiliate him, but to hear his perspective. He asked Danny about Earth's history, about the other predators that had lived there, about how humans had survived and adapted and overcome. Danny answered every question honestly and completely. He told Varketh about the Ice Ages, when glaciers covered most of the planet and humans learned to make fire and clothing to survive the cold. He told him about the Great Migrations, when small bands of humans walked across continents, adapting to every environment they encountered. He told him about the wars against nature itself, the long struggle to tame a world that seemed determined to kill them. Varketh listened to it all with genuine interest. The Dracorian had lived his entire life, believing that strength was measured in claws and fangs. Danny had shown him a different kind of strength, one that did not roar or charge or strike with overwhelming force. It was a quiet strength, a patient strength, the strength of a species that simply refused to stop. Other predator species at the academy began looking at the human students differently, too. The casual contempt that had marked their interactions before was gone. In its place was cautious curiosity, and sometimes something that looked like respect. What else had these soft, clawless creatures survived? What other monsters had they outlasted? What secrets did their strange, endurance-built bodies hold? The prey species were affected differently. To them, the humans had become symbols of hope. Here was proof that being born without natural weapons did not mean being born to die. Here was proof that intelligence and persistence could triumph over raw physical power. If humans could outlast the T-Rex, then perhaps anything was possible. Danny's roommate Crix was particularly affected. The Volanthe had spent his entire life being afraid of predators. He had grown up knowing that species like the Dracorians could kill him whenever they wanted, that his survival depended on their mercy. But now, he saw things differently. "Your species did not just survive," Crix said to Danny one evening, his scales glowing with thoughtful colors. "You won. You beat every predator your world ever produced. How does that feel?" Danny thought about the question for a long moment. "It feels like responsibility," he said finally. "Humans did not just kill those creatures. We drove them extinct. Some of them deserved it. They would have killed us if we had not killed them first. But others were just animals, doing what nature designed them to do. We wiped them out anyway, because we could." He looked at Crix with serious eyes. "Power is dangerous, Crix. Humans have learned that lesson the hard way. We have done terrible things to each other and to our world. But we have also learned to be better. We are still learning." Lucy found Danny on the observation deck a few days later. The deck was a popular spot for students, a wide platform with transparent walls that offered views of the stars in every direction. But at this late hour, it was nearly empty. Danny stood alone at the railing, watching the distant lights drift past. "You know," Lucy said, leaning against the railing beside him, "half the station is terrified of us now." Danny smiled faintly. "Good. Is it, though?" Lucy turned to face him. "We came here to build bridges, Danny, to show the galaxy that humans can be trusted, to prove that we deserve a place among the stars. Are we really going to do that by scaring everyone?" Danny considered her words carefully. "Fear and respect are not the same thing," he said. "But sometimes you need one before you can earn the other. Humans spent centuries being underestimated on Earth. By nature, by each other, by everything that wanted us dead. I am not going to let that happen out here." "So what happens now?" Danny turned to look at the stars. Billions of them, scattered across the darkness like diamonds on black velvet. Each one might have planets. Each planet might have life. And somewhere among all those lights, humanity was trying to find its place. Now we prove that we are more than just survivors, Danny said. We show them what humans can build when we are not busy fighting to stay alive. We show them our art, our music, our science, our dreams. We show them that the same persistence that helped us outlast the dinosaurs can help us build something beautiful. Lucy smiled. That sounds like a pretty good plan. It is the only plan that matters. Below them, the lights of Nexus Station glittered like a galaxy in miniature. Thousands of species living and working together, building something new. And among them, 12 humans were slowly changing how the entire galaxy thought about Earth. Years passed. Danny graduated from the academy with the highest honors. He went on to work for the Interstellar Coalition, first as a translator, then as a negotiator, and finally as a diplomat. His reputation grew with each passing year. The human who had brought the T-Rex skull, the human who had taught a Dracorian about patience. When Danny was 38 years old, he was appointed as the first human ambassador to the Dracorian homeworld. It was a historic moment, the culmination of years of work to build trust between humans and one of the galaxy's most feared species. On the day Danny arrived, Varketh was there to greet him. The old instructor had retired from teaching years ago. His scales had faded to a softer gray, and his movements were slower than Danny remembered. But his 4 eyes still burned with the same golden fire. They sat together in Varketh's study, sharing a drink made from some Dracorian plant that tasted like honey mixed with smoke. On the mantel behind Varketh's chair sat the old Valanthe skull, the same one that had once frightened generations of students. Beside it, in a place of honor, sat a small replica of a T-Rex skull. A gift from Danny on the day of his graduation. I still think about that day, Varketh admitted, swirling his drink. I spent my whole life believing I understood what it meant to be a predator. I thought I knew everything about strength and power and survival. You showed me I was wrong. Danny raised his glass. Humanity learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing in the universe is not the creature with the biggest claws, he said. It is the one that refuses to give up. Varketh nodded slowly. His eyes moved to the T-Rex skull on his mantel. To humans, he said, raising his own glass. The galaxy's most patient hunters. Danny smiled. Too understanding. They drank together as the sun of the Dracorian homeworld set outside the window, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. And somewhere, across the vast distances of space, the people of Earth were looking up at the stars, dreaming of the future they would build. A future where they would no longer be newcomers or outsiders. A future where they would finally be home. The end.